Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much for inviting me to the event today and to speak at it. It's always really inspiring coming to these sorts of events, to hear about all the wonderful work that's going on. And it really is inspirational, some of the work that you're doing here. And a lot of the dynamism, I think, for Smokefree 2025 is happening at local level, as I'll sort of be talking about a bit more in a moment. So it's just fabulous to hear about all this. And I'd just like to thank all the other speakers, and particularly thank Richard Foster for coming over to New Zealand and sharing his leading edge work from Melbourne, and also to thank Mayor Dalzell, because I think having senior politicians here is really important. So I'm going to talk a bit more about going back to why smoking's so important, or smoke-free is so important, where we are with Smoke-Free 2025, and therefore why local activity towards Smoke-Free 2025 is so very important. And I will mention some things about international trends. There's a few slides that I might flick over because they've sort of been talked about before, so if you'll just indulge me with that. Just to go back to the beginning, and this mirrors, I think, a bit what Scott was saying. This is the burden of disease study from New Zealand. This shows different risk factors for preventable death and disability, measured by DALYs, and tobacco use is still the number one in that. So it's a big issue. But this is a slide I often show when I'm teaching medical students, is remember the human suffering behind the smoking statistics. And I think it's easy to talk about big numbers, but these are real people. And the example I talk to the medical students about is a real one from my own career, which really got me interested in this area and in public health. So I was a registrar in respiratory medicine in the UK, and I remember seeing a woman who came to see me who had coughed up some blood, and she had a chest X-ray and it showed a lump on it, and I did the bronchoscopy and we found a tumour. And the thing that I remember was seeing this poor woman, she was a 42-year-old woman, and saying, well, I'm afraid to say we've found you've got lung cancer. And the memory I have is of her just dissolving into tears, absolutely inconsolable, because she was not going to see her children grow up. And there was little I could do to reassure her. And sure enough, she died within 6 weeks. So the tobacco industry often talks about smoking as being an informed adult choice. And you think in this woman's case about just how hollow that sort of statement is. So she started smoking when she was 12. How do you have an informed choice when you're 12? She was a heavy smoker. She wanted to stop. She had tried repeatedly to stop. How can you have a choice when you're addicted to something and you can't exercise that choice? And it also illustrates, although it was great to hear the mayor's story about stopping smoking in her mid-40s, and that is certainly, we very much want to encourage people to stop at any age, but we also want to make sure people don't start. And for some people, stopping in their mid-40s is too late. And that was the case with this woman. So we really want to do everything we can about preventing people starting smoking, and particularly preventing young people starting smoking. Again, echoing some of the things that Scott said right at the beginning, this is in 1950, a couple of studies came out in the UK and in America, which was some of the first really robust scientific evidence showing that smoking caused lung cancer. Now the point about this is, and these reports here are the Royal College of Physicians reports that came out in the 60s and things, bringing together all the evidence. The point about this is the first reports is 65 years ago. And these reports, and the US Surgeon General report as well, early 1960s, 50 years ago. So surely, after all this time, we should be successfully preventing young people starting to smoke. Unfortunately not. So this is smoking amongst 20 to 24-year-olds in the 2013 census. So this is the smoking rate amongst all 20 to 24-year-olds, about 20%, and this is amongst Maori, so almost 40%. Now you think 65 years after we've known pretty well conclusively that smoking causes lung cancer, 40% of young Maori are coming into adulthood already addicted to smoking. And unfortunately, a lot of them will carry on smoking for a long time, and if they do so, about half of them or more will be killed prematurely by that smoking. Now that's an astonishing thing to happen, and it's an astonishing failure of society that 60 years after we knew, this is still happening. We're not doing well enough. And if you contrast that with, say, asbestos, we found out asbestos causes lung cancer and mesothelioma and asbestosis. We've got rid of asbestos. We've not done it with smoking, and new generations continue to come through. But the good news is the goal in New Zealand, which Prudence showed very clearly how that came out of the Te Peke Kore and the Maori Affairs Select Committee. So the government agreed in 2011 to the goal of reducing smoking to minimal levels, and also tobacco availability to minimal levels, and that's important to remember as well. So this was a world-leading goal, the first government in the world to do so. So this was an astonishingly good thing for public health and for health in New Zealand. However, it's not all good news. So if we look at the projections for what's going to happen in terms of achieving 2025, so this is some very complex modelling done by a group in my department, led by Tony Blakely and Nick Wilson. And this shows what will happen to smoking over time with the 2025 highlighted there. And as you can see, overall, we're on track to get it down to about 8%, but for Maori, we're only going to get it to about 19%, so nowhere near. Okay, so we're not going to get there on the current business as usual scenario. And I thought these questions that were put down in Parliament by Annette King last week were quite revealing in the language. So, first one, further to the response to written question, blah, blah, blah. What political action, if any, has he, and this is the Associate Minister of Health, taken to reduce the consumption of tobacco since 20th February 2015? And then the second one is, what the hell's happening with plain packaging? On litter reduction, it's really, really important. I mean, one of the few things that the tobacco industry has done in terms of changing the cigarettes, when all the health scare, as they put it, came out in the 50s, there was a statement that the industry said they were going to do everything they could to make tobacco products safer. They've really done two things to tobacco products since then. One is they've put filters on them, and filters do absolutely nothing to reduce the health risk of smoking. They're completely ineffective. And the second thing is they put little perforations in front of the filters, and all they do, they're part of the light and mild scam, which is to fool the smoking machines that there's less tar and nicotine in the product when there isn't. So that's the two things they've done. And actually in the last US Surgeon General report, it said that if anything, cigarettes now are more dangerous than they were back in the 50s and 60s. Again, that's pretty astonishing. But going back to litter reduction, one thing that filters do is that they don't degrade. So what you've got now is an enormous environmental problem from all the discarded butts. So Wellington Harbour, for example, is full of all cigarette butts that have been swept into it through the storm drains. So things are happening, as we've heard. Great work in Melbourne. These are some other things happening across Australia, in Brisbane, Ipswich, Adelaide, Wollongong, Perth, Tasmania. I think the list just goes on and on. There's lots and lots going on in Australia in terms of smoke-free pedestrian moles and CBDs and so on. Smoke-free sidewalks in California. So 26 Californian cities with smoke-free sidewalks or pavements, and some of those big cities there. So these sort of signs you see around. And one of the importance of smoke-free streets and malls and so on is we say we want to protect children from being exposed to smoking in the sense of seeing smoking and it being seen as a normal part of behaviour. Well, where do children see smoking? Well, actually it's not. So children, although obviously they congregate in playgrounds and so on, when this is some work that George Thompson did about looking at the volumes of children, if you like, in different locations around cities. And actually, the highest volumes were on city streets, not in playgrounds. So if you want to protect children from seeing smoking, just because there's lots of people moving around on streets. And so this brings up the whole idea of child-friendly cities. And as part of that, we should be talking about smoke-free cities. Then there's large educational and other campuses. And as Louise mentioned, Otago recently did that. And I think Otago was actually one of the slower ones. I think most of the other universities in New Zealand had already done it. So that's also happening. And then beaches, again, lots of examples in Australia, including Bondi Beach. all the Queensland beaches, at least between the safe swimming flags. And then in many, many places in North America. And this is just a map from California, with all the green is all the smoke-free beaches across California. And the red line here is the cumulative numbers of smoke-free beaches in the USA. So it's obviously it's going up and up. We talked about impact on business. I won't go through these figures, but in some ways it's sort of a no-brainer when we understand that 85% of the adult population in New Zealand are non-smokers, and then if you put in children as well, that's sort of about 90% of the New Zealand population is non-smoking. So it's going to encourage a whole load of people who are being put off by the nuisance or the second-hand smoke effect. So it's not surprising that the very positive results that are seen. And we've seen that one before. There's lots of things going on in retail tobacco control as well. And again, this is an area that local authorities can play a part in. We've seen it obviously in the alcohol area with the specific legislation that's enabled action at local level. It's a bit less clear about legislation or use of bylaws and things. You probably have to use general sort of public health powers to do that, but there has been there's a discussion article, I think, is it Ken Palmer, about the possibilities of doing that. But there are all sorts of things going. Some of these, obviously, sales to minors have been, to under 18s have been banned for a while now. We've had removal of point of sale displays in 2012, I think that was. And then registration and licensing. So I think now in Ireland, in Scotland, in Fiji, in the Cook Islands, in most Australian states, and quite a few US states as well, there's either registration or licensing of retailers. Now in New Zealand there is no such thing. Anyone can start selling tobacco immediately. They don't have to be registered or licensed in any way. That's something we need to address. In California in particular, they're going ahead with things like saying that you can't sell tobacco at all if you're in a retailer close to schools, or they're looking at density type things. You can only have a certain number of retailers in a certain population level, and they're looking at sinking lids on the number of retailers and caps on retailers selling tobacco and so on. And then Hungary, which is probably leading the world on this, has actually restricted it just to a few government-owned outlets. So there's lots that can be done, and I really do encourage that to be an area to be explored. I think we've talked about that one. And there's a lot of support, again, for retail restrictions. This is looking from smokers to non-smokers, occasional smokers and ex-smokers, support for no outlet sales close to schools, for licensing of tobacco retailers, and for fewer tobacco retailers. And as you see, smokers are less supportive, but non-smokers are very, very strongly supportive. And so if you look at this at the overall in the population, you'd see sort of 60-70% support. And again, Year 10 students are also supportive of fewer outlets and outdoor restrictions. And just the importance of the Smokefree 2025 goal and just how inspiring it can be. We interviewed a few young smokers about the 2025 goal and just said, what do you think of this? This was sort of early on before it was very much known about, and this was just one of the quotes that came across, which I think sums it up quite nicely.